Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about something that I believe I've talked about on this channel before, but it would have been a long, long time ago, where I talked about this film is not yet rated. Pretty sure I've talked about this film is not yet rated on this channel before. It's an interesting documentary, I believe from 2006, that talks about film ratings. And it really gets into the nitty gritty on what does or doesn't pass muster. And it tries to get into who actually rates movies, who are these people, and you don't find out a lot and you're not supposed to know who the people are that are rating movies. Like, it's interesting. So if you haven't watched it, I would recommend it. There are naked people in it because that's what it's talking about in part. It's talking about what gets censored and what doesn't, and why, and some of the inconsistencies that were there. Now, there was a production code at one point that was instated July the 1st of 1934. And before that, there was kind of a standard, but it was kind of a voluntary standard. This made it so that if you wanted a movie distributed in the United States, you had to go through them. And right up until Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, nobody really was able to get past this. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf had some questionable language for the time, and so it definitely challenged what the production code was. The production code administration also had the authority to change scripts and scenes. So just imagine you have put together this movie, and maybe it's controversial. Maybe you've got a couple of scenes in there that really push boundaries, but you're like, I need this in here for my movie. And then somebody comes in and goes, that's all fine and dandy, but can we get rid of these scenes here and change the entire tone of your movie? So whether it's violence, whether it's sexual in nature, whatever it is, they're just saying it's gone. This is a much better movie now. This is more palatable. We can sell this to the public. This works. 1943, there was a movie called The Outlaw. Why did they hold it off? Was it because there was a bunch of naked people in it? No. They just felt that it really focused on Jane Russell's breasts too much. Okie dokie. So that's an odd one. And about a year after it had been held out, then they released it. They were like, fine. So basically, it was escalated. Like, let's try this again. We'll appeal it, and on appeal, it went through. But it took about a year. And this was a very real thing. Now, 1952, the Supreme Court rules that motion pictures get First Amendment protection, which helps, right? It means that they have a right to say certain things and have certain things in them. But we didn't see a change until 1968 when the MPA rating system replaced the code. So the don'ts under the code, profanity, all of it. Like, just profanity was out. Suggestive nudity, even in silhouette. So a woman getting changed behind a curtain and you can see what's behind the curtain, that's a big no-no. Drug talk was also a no-no. Any sex talk was a no-no. Any discussion of venereal disease, and you can't talk about that. Scenes of childbirth. So obviously not real childbirth, but anything, no, that's a no. Race mixing. I had to double check this. I was like, what? And I looked it up, and this is the only thing that this could have qualified as. So, what? Ridicule of the clergy. So that's a choice right there. Definitely some movies and TV shows I watch now that wouldn't make it. Goodbye, Warrior Nun. Children's sex organs. We can all agree, none of that. None of that movies. Don't need to talk about it. No. The part that I find weird is that this is here and suggestive nudity. Well, that should really cover the other. An offense to any nation or creed. So imagine that. You're putting a movie together, no profanity, no naked people, no talking about reproductive anything, right? And you can't offend any nation or creed. So, you'd show them the movie, and, just as an example, maybe, well, we think this movie could offend England. This movie makes the Queen look kind of dumb, and so we think this might offend England. You're going to have to change your movie so that these scenes aren't in there. I'm just using that as an example because England, pretty chill bunch. And yeah, I mean, they've been making fun of the clergy themselves and making fun of royalty for a long time. Now, also exercise care. This is an odd terminology, isn't it? I'm making a movie. Well, exercise care if you're going to talk about these things. What does that mean? So use of the flag. So I'm guessing no burning it, no stepping on it, which, oh, I mean, I don't know why you'd have that in a movie. I'm not sure, but all right. International relations. So you can't make another country look bad. You can't really get into some of the uglier stuff. Arson makes sense. Be careful burning down a building. Use of firearms. All right. Theft, and it's all various forms of theft. Brutality, which equals gore. Murder techniques. Smuggling, hangings, or electrocutions. Anything that involves capital punishment. Sympathy for criminals. That's kind of odd. I think that's an odd one, but all right. Public characters and institutions. You have to be careful with that. Sedition makes some sense. Cruelty to children and animals. Agreed. I agree. And lately, horror movies are definitely deciding to get into more of the crossing that line, and I'm not always very comfortable with that. Or spoiler alert, I'm almost never comfortable with it, even if it's part of a storyline. I'm like, couldn't you told it a different way? But again, I'm not going to tell them to change it. It's their movie. Branding of people or animals. Was this really a thing? Prostitution without saying it. So you can't say it, but you also can't show it. No discussion of the world's oldest profession. Drug use, which makes sense because drugs are right here. Scenes with law enforcement, so be careful. Be careful. And it sounds like anything that might be negative about law enforcement would have been automatically gone. You can't do that. And excessive kissing, which I thought was funny. And I thought, okay, so Too Hot to Handle, no, on various reasons on this board. Now, we'll get into the ratings, but I think right here, this is the thing that I've never quite understood. People get more offended by swearing and boobs than they do with murder. And that is odd to me. That has always been odd to me. That I will watch an edited version of a Friday the 13th movie, and they'll take out any scene which might have a woman that's topless, but they leave in the violence and the murder. And I'm like, interesting. Because it's like there's a message being sent about what we should or shouldn't see, and one is apparently okie dokie and the other one is completely off limits, which is odd to me. Now, I wanted to mention two movies because people talk a lot about, well, kids shouldn't see about various movies. I watched Police Academy back when it came out. That came out in 1984. I was 11. It's rated R in the US, 14A in Canada. Police Academy, the one thing that I remember my friends and I talked about, we were surprised was in there, because a lot of Police Academy is honestly pretty harmless. There's a reason why all of the sequels are PG rated movies. There's the scene that feels out of place with all the women in the shower and Steve Guttenberg Mahoney watching, and it just feels out of place. Now, when you're an 11-year-old boy, you don't care that it's out of place, but it does feel kind of out of place. But that was the 80s. I know anytime that I'll try to watch an old movie that I like, I'll tell Yvonne, go, there's boobs in this. And her answer is, it's from the 80s. Of course there is. So it's a running joke. Not all 80s movies had that, but I do remember talking to a friend of mine once, and she was a good actress, beautiful girl, great person, thought she was awesome. And I said, I could see you someday being a starlet in Hollywood. I said, that would absolutely work for you. And she said to me, I couldn't do it because I would never do a nude scene. There's just no way. And my answer to her was, yeah, you're probably going to be out of luck then, because Hollywood. And every movie we saw, almost every actress as well. And then also in 1984, Revenge of the Nerds, which famously my mother said, you're not watching that movie. So I went to Jason's and watched it. And that one's rated R south of the border in the US, and it's 18A in Canada. So the system in Canada, it feels like, is a little more leaning towards, I don't think permissive's the right term, but movies that are PG-13 in the US are usually PG in Canada. There are exceptions, but that's usually the case. So we have G, PG, 14A, which is anybody under 14 has to be accompanied by an adult. Anybody under 18 has to be accompanied by an adult if it's 18A. If it's R, no one under 18 gets in. And adult, same thing, obviously. Difference being, if you're going in to see something that says adult, well, yeah, you're in for something. But I do find it odd, and the one reason that I'm doing this, and it's one of those things that just kind of throws me off, is that, like, I talked yesterday about Schindler's List. Schindler's List is a movie that does have nudity in it, right? There's no way this is going to stay monetized. But there's something I wanted to talk about here. But it's not sexy. There's nothing sexy about that movie, and it's a very, just all of that is very visceral, and it's dehumanizing people, right? So it is a completely different idea behind it. But what I find odd is that, so you have three things that seem to cause problems: violence, nudity, profanity. Then there's, of course, illegal acts as well in there too. But one of these seems to be accepted almost across the board everywhere, and that's the violence part. And for me, I mean, if there's, a scene that, oh, there's somebody's butt. Oh well. Usually I apologize when that kind of thing shows up on the screen, but I do think sometimes that, while, and I'm not saying to censor anything, but I do find it odd that of the three, violence is seen as the most socially acceptable, the one that's not a big deal. I always get a kick out of when I'm watching older movies, and you'll just see guys getting mowed down, and you still see it now in Marvel movies and whatnot, but they don't show any blood, because if they show blood, then it's going to be rated R, which is the consequence of what you're doing, right? So just remove the consequence, and you can keep your PG-13 rating, which I just find really, really strange and odd. I don't think that when it comes to seeing people getting shot, that my offense is there's blood there. That's what I'm offended by. That's not it. That's absolutely not it. So I do find it weird, and I feel like with the, like, for instance, Oppenheimer, there's people who are all mad because there's a nude scene in that. Oh, that's just terrible. It's a movie about the atomic bomb, which was used then to virtually wipe out two cities in Japan. I don't think that a scene between Cillian Murphy and Florence Pugh is a big deal. I really don't. And I think that to me just kind of shows that sensibility. It's really odd to me, because even when I was a kid, some of the violent stuff always kind of stuck with me. One of the reasons why I became such a fan of horror movies is because I did have problems with violence when I was a kid. There were movies that scared me when I was little, and I never let on. I was one of those kids that I could sit and watch a movie and you would not know that I was scared, unless you touched my shoulder, which no one ever did. If anybody ever, I would have gone about 3 feet in the air. But I was always nervous about some of the gory violence, and so I put myself through it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch these movies. I'm gonna sit down and watch them, and eventually, pretty quickly, actually, I was like, okay, I can find a way to cope with this. So for me, as a kid, when I was watching horror movies, I would kind of crack jokes through them. So if I was watching horror movies with my friends, I would be cracking jokes constantly, and that was part of it. Was I was nervous. I might have been a little scared of what was going on, something like that. But those same fears never came out during anything else. Anything else. The one thing is, I'm going to say this, that as a teenage boy, sometimes if a movie had some suggestive scenes in it, you don't want to be watching that with your mom. You just don't. You just don't. You'd rather be anywhere else on planet Earth. In that moment, you'd rather not be in that same room with your mother. As much as I love my mom, and I do, she's a great lady. No, there are definitely movies, if I could go back in time, I would tell the young version of myself, you don't want to go in that room. You don't want to watch that movie. Why don't you go listen to some records? Maybe go outside and play with the soccer ball. Maybe get your putter out and smack the ball around. Do not go into that room. Do not watch that movie. Mom's going to tell you it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And technically there isn't, but it's going to be uncomfortable. But again, the discomfort completely different, and I really, it's not, now when I watch Revenge of the Nerds, I'm more offended by the entire storyline than anything else. There are so many things in that movie that I watch now, and I'm like, oh no, oh wow, that's highly illegal. This is they'd all go to jail. All of them. They'd all be in jail. So there's that. But and of course, Police Academy. There's certainly some lines that get blurred there, but it's not it. I mean, they're both slapstick comedies. Just some of the stuff played off for laughs in movies and TV shows too. That I think is that funny though. Like, and again with TV shows, they could put on a laugh track, and you ask yourself, yeah, but was that really funny? What was said? And I'll do a video on that some other time. But it's just one of those things that sticks with me. The fact that if a movie has swearing, people are like, well, you can't let a kid see this. There's some swearing, as if people don't swear at home, which they do. I do remember conversations where people would say, oh, I don't want my kids to hear that language. And I'd think, have they heard you at home? And again, it wasn't my family. My family was no big deal. The nudity side of things, well, everybody has that as part of, I mean, it's just how all of us end up, and we start that way anyways. But the violence is just sort of, it's in everything, right? Unless it's a little kid's cartoon. And even then, when I was a kid, I mean, violence in cartoons, yeah, it was there. And that I was coming up during the time where they decided cartoons didn't have to have any kind of actual educational benefit either. So they could just do the violence and sell us a bunch of toys. And we just kind of went, all right, well, we'll go buy those toys and watch the violence then, because that's how it was then. But anyways, I wanted to talk about this because I find it fascinating, and it does feel like we might. It's just, when I watch movies now, it's weird what people will focus on. There's a heck of a lot less nudity in movies now than there was 30 years ago. And so it feels like now when it happens, people get all up in arms and angry about it. But they don't with the violence so much, which back in the 80s, that's what was being banned, and that's what people were mad about. Usually it was the violence part. But I've talked about that before. I'll probably do a video on that again. I've talked about the cinema nasties, of course. And whenever you tell somebody, you can't watch this, what are they going to do? They're going to watch it. So when a parent tells their child, you can't watch that movie, their answer is going to be, I'm going to Jason's. Right. And there you go. And so, yeah, there you go. Anyways, this is something I want to talk about today. It was on my mind, and now I have, and I feel better. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.